Hi, this is Liza, and Suzanne and I are going to go through the slides again since some people couldn't hear them this morning. So what we're looking at in this presentation is some information that Suzanne and I received from the people at St. Louis University. She and I teach dual credit courses for them, and so they always have a summer professional development opportunity for us. And this year, the keynote was about online education. So they had their experts present to us about what it is, what it isn't, and ways to be successful. So what we thought we could share with you was some of that information that we received. So in this presentation, we're going to look at what online learning is, look at some of the myths, share some ideas, look at assessment, and then hopefully ease some anxiety that we all have about teaching our online classes and then potentially having to go back to teaching everyone online. So these slides we used this morning with Nearpod, which is a program that they purchased for the district that we're going to be trained on tomorrow. So if you want more information about that, just contact one of us and we can talk to you about how that would work, but it's not going to work during this recording. So let's first talk about what online education is not. So when students are learning online, it's not just pushing lectures out and students having to figure things out and teach by themselves. It's not a place where they're not interacting with us at all and that we don't get to know them. It's not any easier, so the rigor should be the same in an online course as best we can compared to a course that we would be teaching in person. And it's also not an excuse for us to make people make the classes larger and put more students into a single class. These are the definitions they gave us. So like the official definitions for online education is it's delivering instruction to the students that are physically separated from us, and it's supporting those regular interactions between the students and our instructor and the instructor, and a lot of times that happens asynchronously. So just like always, good teaching is good teaching. So the same strategies we use in the classroom when we have students in person will also work for this online education. So we're going to encourage them to participate. We're going to make sure they know our expectations. We're going to make sure that everything we do is aligned to our goals and objectives. We're going to provide opportunities for them to work together, to work with us, for them to practice and apply all of the new information that they're learning. We're going to be there to provide feedback to them so that they can make improvements in what they're doing. And then we're also going to respect diverse ways of learning. So it's not always going to be the same type of learning. So this is another Nearpod slide where students would be able to post on this board. So this morning we talked about what was your biggest challenge, and then people were able to post some responses there.
Okay, so one thing that we'd like you to think about is during remote learning this past spring, how many of you found it difficult to keep up with your 7 classes? Was it tough to remember which class had to do what and when? I know that this is something that I struggled with. I would think, oh, I already put that assignment up, they're ready to do that. And then a student would email me and say, how are we supposed to do our assignment? You haven't posted it yet. It was just really difficult to remember when I was posting what for which classes, when things were due. So you can imagine what this also would have been like for students because they were dealing with 7 different teachers. So here's a scenario for you to think about if we're going to think about putting ourselves into a student's shoes. Imagine that an algebra teacher assigns work and this person says the worksheets and videos are posted in Google Classroom. They're due Wednesday at noon. That same student is also in physics. The experiment is due Friday, and this teacher has posted the information on a class Facebook page. It has to be submitted by email. It's due Friday at 11. Spanish is using something called My Language Lab. They're going to submit work weekly. That work will be submitted through Google Classroom, turned in by Monday morning. And you can see it goes on and on. And the picture we're trying to create here is that while it was difficult for us, it was even more difficult for students. So we need to be able to do something to change this. So the question that was posed in the professional development that we watched is, how do we make the students' workload and also ours more manageable? And the answer that was given to us is basically we need to abide by 3 rules. Be consistent, be predictable, and also be inclusive. When we're saying be consistent, what we mean is that you should post assignments at the same place each week and also on the same days. Make sure due dates and times and place of submission are the same. So if you have them turn things into Google Classroom, stick with that. If things are always due at 11:59 p.m., don't suddenly switch that to it's due during the class period. So make sure you have policies and that you stick to them. It's also important to be predictable. So be available at the same time each week. If you tell students that you're available between 7 and 8 a.m. to answer emails, then make sure that you stay with that. If you tell them that your office hours are from 1:30 to 2:30, make sure that that stays the same. Maintain a schedule like you would in the classroom. You still need to try to create a routine even for those students who are going to be learning remotely. Feedback is also really important. So with whatever way you choose to provide feedback, whether you're providing comments on their papers, whether you're going to be sending emails where you give feedback to some students about assignments, you need to make sure that students know where to look for that feedback. Also make sure students know how to ask questions. Should they message you over Remind? Should they put a comment in Google Classroom? Should they email you? And make sure that you keep a schedule for posting assignments, announcements, and grades. Lastly, be inclusive is something that I hadn't thought much about until I saw this professional development. I hadn't really considered the importance of keeping parents included in all of my communication during remote learning. And I think what I especially like about this is the emphasis on showing parents what kind of work is being done by you. I don't think it's a secret that we have people who are questioning our ability to teach remotely. They're concerned that their students are just going to be learning on their own at home. We know that's not how it's going to be. We know we're going to be reaching out to them, making videos for them, trying to include them in our classwork. But we need to show parents and students exactly all the work that we're putting in. So kind of make that invisible work that we do visible to everybody involved, and make sure that students and parents all know our course expectations. So another big question then is, how are we going to build an online class that includes those three elements we just went over? And what we were told is that using modules in Google Classroom will help. So Liza's going to tell you more about those.
So modules are something that are used a lot in online education. So modules are considered chunks of material that are all related to the same topic or unit. How you set modules up is probably going to depend on how your course is set up. For some people, a module could be a whole unit. For other people, it could just be a single class day. So we'll show you some examples so you can kind of see the difference between those. The nice thing about modules is it breaks the material into sections that allow students to know what's expected of them. If you're sharing this information with parents, the parents can see what's expected, and it really helps keep everybody on track, the student and the teacher. There's usually some kind of intro section. The goals or objectives are listed for the unit, and then they can have different sections, again, depending on how they're set up: introductions, videos, assignments, self-assessments, and so on. So for us, since we're using Google Classroom, we would use the Classwork tab to create these modules. So before you start, you would have to think about how are you going to divide your material up. So would you have a module for each lesson? So like each individual class day, would that be considered a module? Are you going to do modules weekly, or would your whole unit be considered a module? And again, it really depends on the flow of your own particular class when you're trying to decide how to set those up. When you create those modules, you're going to use the topics button, and then you don't have to post more than one at a time. So some of the examples might show more than one here, but you really, and you don't have to put even maybe everything. If you're using a module for the whole unit, you don't even have to put everything in there at once. You just add things to it as you get it completed. Other things you can include that they suggested, at the end of it, you can include some kind of self-assessment so the students can kind of check for understanding and see if the information that they learned makes sense to them and if they're ready for their assessment. You could leave some space for student feedback, so what helped them, what impeded their learning, how long did each assignment take you, so that would be something useful for us to know. Again, because we're not all versed at how to teach online, we might think that they could get through something and it actually takes them a lot longer, or things might not take them as long as what we thought. And then you can also create discussion boards that would allow communication between you and the student, and between those remote students and the in-student part of the students that are learning in your classroom. So the first example was a history example. This one was provided by a history teacher at Belleville East. I believe this was an AP US course that he taught. He was actually able to teach this course through SLU over the summer, and they received some specific training on online education. And his modules, he used the modules in Google Classroom because that's what he's going to use when he goes back to the classroom in the fall. But when you look at his, just know that he also was using another learning management system with his students that was provided by SLU. So not everything maybe for his is going to show up in this module. So for him, a module was the whole unit of study, and things that he posted. The objectives were always listed. Something that I thought was really nice was this overview video that he created. So every module he started with an overview for the students so they kind of had an idea of what they were going to learn in that particular unit. Then he also had content videos posted, so these would be probably like his note videos, and then he had discussion board questions. So Suzanne shared this slideshow with you this morning, so if you want to see a little more information about how he set things up, this is a video that he created that we linked in there. Next example was biology. So this is what Jody did in the spring with her biology students. For her, she used a module, was a week of content. So she had the dates listed for when things were due. Some of the materials that she posted were links for Zoom meetings, her notes, her assignments were in there, and there were different things for that. So you can also bring in some of those other tools that we use like Edpuzzles and Flipgrids. She posted all her resources there, and then also her assessments. I also used modules in the spring. For my class, I used a module as a day of content. So I was trying to replicate what the students were used to in the classroom. So in my class, everything we did was pretty much due within that day or the following day. So my assignments weren't over a long period of time, so that's why I kept my modules as daily modules. So on the board every day, I would have a list of everything that we were going to do with all the assignments. So I replicated that as a module in Google Classroom. So I had all the dates listed. Any module I posted as an assignment. So there was a due date, so the students knew when it was due. All of the activities for the day were listed, and then links to anything that they would need. So videos, Edpuzzles, quizzes, anything else they would need to be able to complete those activities. So I also created a short video, so if you want to see a little more detail about how I had that set up, that is in that slideshow as well. Last example is English. So Suzanne's going to use these this year. For hers, her module is a unit of content. So her modules start with the objectives for the module. Then she has all of her readings incorporated, her exercises, other materials, videos she's going to add as she gets those created. This is another Nearpod slide. So this is a poll where students could, if you were running this with Nearpod, students could then interact with your presentation.
Okay, so the other thing we need to consider now that we know how we're going to post our material and share that with our students is how are we going to assess their learning? And the most important takeaway here is that it's probably time to rethink the way that you're assessing, whether it's formative or summative assessments. So here are some problems that we know exist with online assessments. We know that students have access to the internet as a resource. So they can look up anything that they want, basically. They also have access to their peers' work, possibly. They may not even be doing the work. It could be a brother or sister. It could be a parent who is helping them. And overall, when we're looking at the way we're asking questions, multiple choice is simply not going to work for all of our assessments. So here's some other things to keep in mind. Students will have access to the information. There is absolutely no way that we can fully stop this. We're going to be using Impero in the classroom to help us at least see and possibly lock student screens. But we know that students who are working remotely and are not on a school-issued device, we won't be able to see their screens. So there's simply no way that we can make sure that they're not looking up information. So the way that I think we should approach this is to realize that the sooner we recognize that students have access to that information, the stronger we can make our assessments, the better we can make them. So I almost think we have to embrace the fact that they'll be able to do some online research while they're doing assessments. And the question that was posed to us during our PD is whether there's really any harm in allowing a student to access their books, their notes, their web sources. And truly, there isn't. It's only a problem if we're just assessing their knowledge. So if I'm just expecting them to memorize basically like the plot of, say, To Kill a Mockingbird, then if they're using an outside source, absolutely, I'm not getting a true assessment because they can look up all the answers. However, if I'm looking at skills, if I'm asking them to apply what they've learned and to really think outside of the box to explain their ideas when it comes to my assessment, then it shouldn't bother me too much if they're just able to look up some basic information. So what we need to probably focus on is more assessments that are going to include writing prompts and other kinds of prompts that encourage application of information and skills. And one thing to consider is something like Google Forms too. They would be able to help us a little bit when it comes to students looking up information. Certainly if you give them a timed assessment, then it's not going to be as easy for them to look up so much information. They will run out of time on that assessment for you. G-Clocked is an add-on that you can use for that. Here are some ideas for various subject areas, and certainly if you look around you can find much more. For math and science, one example that was given to us would be to give students a problem that has been solved but there's an error in it. You could have students write a written response where they have to explain, why, how the problem was solved incorrectly. Instead of just having students write it out, you can actually have them explain it to you, recording themselves. You could use something like Screencastify Submit. If you haven't used Screencastify before, it's really, really easy. You basically just have it installed as an add-on to Chrome. You press a button and it'll start recording. And I think most of the students find this really easy to use also. An example from English, you could use Flipgrid to have students film themselves talking about a text. Certainly, anytime they're speaking like this too, we're working on those speaking and listening standards, so that's important. An example for history, one thing that you can do in Google Classroom, like Liza mentioned before, is you can have a Google discussion board. You can pose a prompt or a question and have students respond to that. What's really nice too is that you can have students responding to each other. Specifically in the situation we're in where we have remote and in-person students, you could have the remote and in-person students actually corresponding to one another. So it's one way to get those remote students to really feel like they're part of the classroom too. This is really important, this last note here. Choose a few tools, a few kinds of technology that work for you and use those. You can't be an expert on everything. Certainly, I'm not going to come to school next week on Monday and use Screencastify, Flipgrid, and a Google discussion board, but I am going to try to put myself outside of my box and maybe try to use a few new things during the first quarter. So find what works for you and run with it. This is another Nearpod slide that we have. So this is an example of being able to put an open-ended question up. This one being, what are some other ideas for assessments? And finally, one last thought to leave you with. All this work that you're doing right now, it seems really stressful, and it is certainly making my planning for the new school year move a lot more slowly than it normally does. But all of this planning for teaching online is really just improving our in-person teaching. We're picking up a lot of skills that, yes, they really help remote learning, but they're also going to be really valuable within our classrooms. And it's important to remember that we're all in this together and that we have to rely on each other for support. So if you saw anything in this presentation that you think will work for you, if you want help just starting your Google Classrooms, if you're to the point where you're ready to start making modules, please reach out to Liza, reach out to me, reach out to anybody in your department or in the building that can help you, because certainly if we all share the knowledge that we have, it will make all of this a lot easier. Thanks.